Fun fact, anatomy is hard. Hi, my name is Mildly Gothic, welcome to my channel. I'm gonna show you my process of painting a sports thing. I don't know if it's obvious, I'm not a sports person. This is being done as part of a commission for a friend of mine. This is the third video on this process. I forgot that I did a first one that was kind of a haphazard process. This is the third video on this process, and it is focusing on one of the other boards. Last time I did the Saturn V. If you want to check that out, that video will be right here. I'm very happy with how that turned out. And today is sports. And I will be painting the helmet catch from the 2008 Super Bowl, this image right here. And I'm stressed about it because painting people is really, really hard. There's a couple reasons why. Anatomy, which feeds into proportion, and the last one is colors and faces. Skin tone, we're very good at, as humans, of knowing what skin tone looks like and also what faces look like. Uncanny valley and all of that. So I'm very concerned in making sure that my paintings actually look good, look like who they're supposed to, look like what they're supposed to, and just, in the end, look good on top of all of that. I'm actually very pleased with how I've gotten, the point I've gotten to so far. No, they are not done, but please, 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 please stick with me. I promise I'm gonna try to make this a little bit informative on my process, how I approached color mixing, breaking up this larger project into sections, and hopefully be both entertaining and a little bit informative. So if that sounds like fun, then please keep watching and let's get to the project. If you can't tell, the football is already done. If you missed the first part, that is because I basically wasn't sure if I was actually going to film these at all. Had a whole background, completely painted over it with gray, and started painting. And I picked the football to start with because I needed a solid reference point in both color and scale. Football's pretty easy. If I couldn't get the football right, none of the rest of this was going to go well. But the football went well, so I gained a lot of confidence. And so what I decided to tackle next was the gloves, because they are the item directly interacting with the football. So to start with those, I just had to get a base layer of color down. The dark gray is so dark that basically the first layer of paint I did for anything was just to get something on top of it so that I could then build up my light colors and shadows from there. The white on the gloves is actually a little bit of a cream tone. I mixed in a little bit of like a soft pink, a little bit of Naples yellow to try to counteract some of the super, super cool tones that this white paint had in it. And I also added a little bit of those into the red to make it a little bit more of a pink, because while there is a lot of crimson throughout this piece, these gloves did not read as stark crimson red to me as the other colors and the other components of this piece did. But I was just following my pencil guide. Basically, each time I worked on a section, I made sure to true up my pencil marks and make sure that my new pencil marks would have this next section of the painting be in proportion with respect to everything else, because things do shift. If you go a little bit outside of the line in one place and kind of keep going with it, suddenly you could have basically compounding errors and nothing is really in proportion anymore. So I was trying my best to stay within my pencil lines because those are how I was going to make sure that all of this stayed relative to each other. I also decided to tackle this in sections because it made thinking about it very easy. It was very easy to break this big painting down and literally just work on it one element at a time. Another thing that really spooked me when I was starting this project was how big it was, and literally not knowing where to start and simply just picking, I'm only going to do the hands, I'm only going to do the helmet. You'll see later that I continued this process of breaking it up. It truly helped me actually get this done. So the next part of the gloves is the detail. Started kind of with those lines on the fingers and tried to work it out from there. But this is where I started struggling with another issue of this entire painting is humans are proportional, except football players don't actually look like humans that you'd normally think of when you'd go to sketch them because of all the padding and protective material they're wearing. The fingers on this glove curled around the football look so wrong. I had such a hard time with this because they're pin straight. There is no bend, there are no creases. the creases and bends in the fabric from them having the glove on their hand do not match the creases and bends of an actual human hand that would be in the same position. So that was one of my true struggles throughout this entire piece, was fighting my own desire to remove some of the bulk and the extra just weirdness of the painting that lends itself to it actually looking like football players, but it makes my brain hurt because there's parts of it where up close it just doesn't look like how a human shoulder or how a human hand should look, because it doesn't. They're wearing pads, and so it's important to capture that, otherwise it doesn't actually convey that they're football players. You lose that essence of the piece. So the helmet is the next piece, and as previously mentioned, I started this by truing up my pencil lines because I actually understood where it sat with respect to the hands. And painting this was a challenge in light sources. And if anything else on my channel should be apparent, it's that I struggle with light sources. I've gotten better at it over time, but shiny objects, especially when they are so dark like the blue in this helmet, really only reflect light at certain points. And so your ability to truly convey what color it is happens at only those highlight points. So I based the entire helmet out in a dark blue. This was a mix of black and some blue tones. It took me a little bit to figure out what the exact blue tone was. And after kind of generally making that darker, I realized most of this helmet is actually going to be black, because there are only really 2 points of highlight on this helmet, and they happen on either side of the crimson streak down the middle. And this is where I learned that the red in this was going to be a challenge. There is a color called crimson, and it was the red I was using. However, I had to mix it with burnt sienna to actually achieve that really nice red look. So the way you layer highlights, honestly, the best way to describe it is think of a neon sign. How truly the center of a neon sign is white, and you kind of see the color in the glow. So I layered the blue in varying shades of its most true form, and then slowly mixing it with more and more white to kind of create this fuzzy haze of the right blue tone to try to convey what the actual color of this helmet was. This was probably a little bit more of like a dry brush sort of fuzzing it out than it was mixing it with water. And once I had a better idea of where that was going to go, I kind of filled the rest of the helmet in with black, because that is the way to convey that shine, is to have really, really intense contrast. Contrast is your best friend when you are working with really harsh light sources. The final layer was as white as it could get without being true white, because those are the final details on top. That thin line in the center of the neon is small bits of just white. Now, the other bit is shading the red. This is kind of where I learned that mixing that burnt sienna in with it gave me the most perfect actual crimson. And so I tried to use mostly brown and not black when I was shading any of the red parts further on this piece, because it kept it more true to the tone of the red, and it didn't actually decrease and like wash out any of my red tone. Sometimes when you mix things with black, you end up losing that actual true value of the color because it just becomes more and more black. You don't actually darken the color and maintain that appearance, if that makes any sense. There are more technical art terms. I'm sorry, I don't know all of them. But the details on the helmet were pretty simple. I drew them kind of with a pencil first so that I could make sure they were where they were supposed to be before I started painting, and that still didn't save me. Because there was so little in the rest of the helmet to actually convey the curve, I kind of forgot that the helmet was curved, and so this New York Giants logo I painted with straight lines. All of it was straight lines, and I was so happy with it until I looked at it and realized that's not right. And it wasn't right because it was sitting on a curved surface. So that's entirely my fault, and I did kind of fix it and tried to curve it a little bit, but you can only do so much to fix a design that doesn't have much open space once it's been applied. It's a lot easier to just do it right in the first place. So that was kind of on me. But I fixed up the highlights and added all of the rest of the little details to the painting. But yeah, something like this, you have to just inherently remember that it is curved, because unfortunately there is not always enough detail to remind you of that fact. Luckily, by the time I got to all the other like numbers and things on his helmet, other than the American flag, I kind of had a better idea of the curve of the helmet, and these things were a lot more proportional. Something else that helped this so much was just kind of lightly putting in that helmet cage, that face cage on the front, because it actually made it the right size for a human head. I decided to do the arm next, and this was terrifying, but I approached it in a way that I think was kind of smart. I mixed all my colors ahead of time, and I started with what I kind of felt was a mid-tone. It was not the darkest tone of the skin, and it was not the lightest. It was a good mid-tone that everything else would blend into, and I think I had Naples yellow, burnt umber, and I forget what that other very yellow tone is. But I kind of mixed a bunch of those together to kind of create this skin tone. And once I had the whole thing based out, I could then start going in and trying to create my muscle tone and definition using my darkest color, which was just the plain burnt umber, and kind of putting that in all of the dark places. And I wasn't too concerned about blending it out at that point because I needed it all to be super smooth with itself. So then I brought in my lightest tone, which is not white. I did not mix with white. I used that Naples yellow, which is a very, very soft, pale yellow, as my kind of lightening agent, because using white in this context, I just did not think it was going to give the right tone to the skin. I thought it might make him look dead or unhuman. I figured sticking to actual warm tones and those sorts of colors would actually help me get a better human looking result. And really, I just kind of layered it. I treated every layer as I should go one layer lighter, one layer darker, and use that to really build up some different color tone and definition. And I just need to say, I'm very, very proud of this piece. So I've made a decision, and I don't know how I feel about it. I didn't film it, but I was doing the crimson lines on this first, and then I was going to fill it in with white. Stupid idea. Should have based it out in white first, like I did the Saturn V, did in gray, and then did all the detail on top. And then I realized it was going to be hard to find a stopping point and like blending it all in. So I kind of decided to haphazardly paint everything that I think is his shirt this creamy, mostly white. There's a little bit of shading from when I was trying. So my garage door is open now, so you can hear the lovely cicadas. But basically I've completely lost a full square of detail. My plan is to then render out like the shoulder. Now that I have like a base, I think it'll be a lot easier to blend colors on top of. So I'm gonna let this fully dry. Didn't bother getting it as secure, filled in up there, because that's going to be mostly dark because of the shading. I just got attacked by a bug. So yeah, we're going to let this dry. I'm really happy with how the arm looks, so we're happy there. Concerns, but yeah, that is what I've decided to do there. So I have to wait for this to completely dry before I screw it up. Yay. So as mentioned, this is now my second time putting the detail on the back of this shirt. And I decided to start out by kind of repenciling in all of my lines. I had lightly given myself an idea of where those cross marks were, like my guiding grid lines, so that I could still make sure that everything on the shirt was kind of relative and in proportion to itself, so that it all ended up in the right place, because it still needs to look correct. And I spent a good bit of time getting this right, because I didn't want to have to try to clean up these pencil lines around all of this red and all of this lettering. Again, as I mentioned, I used a mix of my crimson and burnt sienna to kind of create that really nice, what felt like more of a true crimson red, at least in the context of this painting, and a variety of brushes to be really, really fine and very particular with painting this detail. I will say most of this red took 2 coats to get a good solid base, and then a third layer on top that actually was all of the shading and made it truly look smooth. So here's a little where we are with a football player. I still need to work on some of the shading in this quadrant right here. Obviously, I don't have his back or any details fleshed out yet. And I'm really debating, I think I want to do the reflection in the helmet, because I think right now I'm losing that line of definition between the helmet and this like dark undershirt he's wearing. So I definitely need to work on that. My current debate is, do I spend more time working on the jersey, because I also really want to smooth that area out. Like, it looks good from a distance, it's just really messy up close, so I really want to work on smoothing that out. So do I work on his jersey more, or do I start on my other dude over here? That is the current debate and dilemma, and what may be several minutes for me is going to be seconds for you. I then got so spooked by the size of the rest of the jersey that I decided to start working on the other part of this piece, which is the Patriot player. I started with a skin tone. He looks like he has a very olive kind of yellow undertone. That could also just be the terrible quality of the picture that I had, but I kind of tried to make a good mid-ish skin tone. I'm still not sure if he's going to get a face. You'll see throughout this entire thing. That skin tone does not change. There is no shading. He's just kind of faceless. But then I got onto the helmet, which isn't nearly as complicated because it's just gray. However, there's some weird tones to this helmet. And so I actually mixed a very, very small amount of green into the gray that I made for the helmet because I could tell that there's some other undertone. It was either a blue or a green kind of mixed into the helmet to give it this really weird gray color. It is not just like black and white mixed together. There is another color tone. I went with green and I actually think it worked really well. I really think it helped sell this piece. But kind of like Saturn V, I then was brushing different tones of light and dark gray onto a curved surface to try to make it look three-dimensional, slowly building up my lighter colors because there are two distinct shine spots on the helmet, and I need it to kind of look three-dimensional. I definitely made his helmet a little bit too wide in the back, but that's okay. My plan is to fix it with the background, so I'm not too worried. But a lot of the other primary details, and the reason this helmet was stressing me out, is the face cage of that big face guard that goes across the front of the helmet. I needed to make sure that that looked clean. And there's a lot of details that go underneath it. Luckily with paint, you can layer. And so it makes a lot more sense to start with your background and slowly build your layers on top to the final layer, because it's really hard to paint small sections behind something and have it still look smooth and cohesive. If you can and your paint allows, it's a lot easier to just kind of build those layers on top. So once I had those background layers done, which include those two chin straps connecting to his little chin piece, I went ahead and sketched out lightly in pencil where all of the lines for the helmet went, and dove in pretty quickly with my red. I think I leaned into making these lines a little bit thicker because it allowed me some more flexibility in truing up those edges and making sure they were super smooth. The smaller the line, the harder it is to be sure that it's going to end up super nice and crispy. So if the scale allows it, I tended to lean into making things a little bit thicker because it meant that I had a little bit more wiggle room to clean it up. And by that, you make it thinner at first because you can always make it thicker. But again, it depends on the scale and kind of the piece of what you're working with. Luckily with this one, I had a lot of flexibility to make these lines nice and smooth. It was also at this point I decided to do the reflection on the helmet. And now color mixing for this was really interesting because it is not just the white and the crimson reflected into the helmet, it is being reflected onto a blue surface, and therefore the colors on it will be tinged by blue. So when I made a gray for the reflection of the helmet, I made sure that that gray was going to have a little bit of blue to reflect the color of the helmet while also still being pale enough that it was clear that it was supposed to be the jersey. This was a challenge because then I'm shading within an entirely different kind of color scheme. Blue is my base tone that I need to make sure to maintain. So even my darkest gray that I'm using, it's, gonna have some blue in it. And the biggest part was the crimson. The 8.5 in this needed to have a blue tone. And so I straight up mixed blue in with it. And so the color that is for the 8.5 in the helmet reflection is actually a really interesting purple. It's kind of the purple you get when you just mix your red and blues together without paying attention to their undertones, and it kind of turns out a muddy purple. That ended up being perfect for still reading light crimson while also being clear that it is the reflection in the helmet. The challenge here was the scale and the skew of where his shoulder is in reference kind of to the helmet changes the look of the letters. Reflections tend to look a little bit weird because of the way the light bounces in and out. So that 5 got super, super warped, but it makes sense because it's a reflection. And I also think this helps kind of sell the curve of the helmet that was missing from that lower quadrant that you just couldn't really tell. I don't know if any of that explanation made sense, but I am very, very happy with how this reflection turned out. And I did make sure to include this weird little strap thing on the side of the helmet. It kind of helped me disguise that transition point between the helmet and the jersey. I did also finally get to the American flag and try to update the colors in there. And something else that I did on the back of the helmet is I went in and I darkened and colored the 21, 8, and 5 with a gray so that they were actually part of the lighting of the helmet. For some reason, I had just done them in a plain white without even considering that they should not be a stark white because they're on the back of his helmet and therefore would be gray. But I fixed that, and again, I also think that helps sell the curvature of the helmet. Clearly, what I did next off camera was work on more of the shading of that lower part of the shirt. And while I do think it looks good, I also think it's way too crisp. Like, I definitely need to smooth out some of those lines and color transitions because it looks really weird. It doesn't quite look like fabric. I do think it conveys what it needs to, but I also think it just looks wrong. But I did that so that I could get all of the shading consistent and then paint the 8 on top of it where it goes. And I think this worked super, super well. I'm honestly really pleased with the shading. And I think it really achieves that like pulling and that tug motion down the back of the shirt, which leads me into what I did next. I knew it was time to go back and work on the Patriot dude, I just didn't quite know where. And I really tried to sketch out where his hand should sit, and I kept struggling because the wrist never seemed like it ended up in the right place, so I decided to paint the arm, which I apparently filmed none of, and I'm so sorry. But I approached it the same way that I did the face of the other guy, and once I had the arm in place, I could work on the hand. I started with the light tones, and it should be noted that the white that I used for this, I had actually mixed a little bit of blue into, because where his hand was, not only did it not look white, it didn't look like just a plain gray, but it didn't look like the same gray from the helmet, so I didn't go for green. I went for a little bit of blue, and it was way too blue. I basically painted over it with a normal gray. But it was worth an experiment to see whether or not that was going to be the better gray tone for this placement on the painting. Once I had all the light tones in, I went in with the dark. And I mixed an incredibly dark blue to the point that it was truly almost black. And essentially played, paint by numbers, fill in the gaps, and tried to fill in all the gaps in my pencil lines. This again is where I ran into the problem of football player hands and gloves don't look like human hands or gloves. And I also think his hand is too small. Every time I step away from it, I gave this dude the beefiest arm, and his hand looks so tiny in comparison. It's just humorous. I think it looks fine. I think it still looks like what it's supposed to. But man, if his hand doesn't look really, really tiny. But I did try to pick a blue tone that still had enough blue in it that I could actually shade with black, because getting the shadows of this was really, really important, and I knew it was going to be really hard to mix a proper, blue highlight. So the more I could do with shadows instead of having to add highlights, the better. So I did the blue for the Patriot shirt entirely off camera because I was so unsure about how it was going to go. I mixed every blue I had into it. I mixed white. There's certain areas that I didn't think came out the best, but the good thing was they were going to be completely covered by all of my white tones anyways. And so you can kind of see in the highlights, I went through and I had pencil marked everything already on the shirt so that I knew where those things were going to go so that I could then start basing them out in white. And that include his number, which is 37, the little Super Bowl logo on his shirt, the 37 on the sleeve, the Patriots logo on the sleeve, and also those other small details on the front of the shirt. I based everything out in white again, is kind of how I had been doing, and trying to pay more attention than I have for some other areas of this to, again, the curvature of his body. The curvature of the fabric is not something that I needed to take note of initially because, again, I just needed to get a base color on there. Once I had that, I could pay more attention to the curvature of the fabric in the tones of the shading and adding a little bit more dimension and highlight into those areas. As I built up the layers, something I did on the numbers specifically was not actually take them all the way to the edge of my pencil marks, because the pencil marks really dictate the full scope of the letters, and for this shirt, this jersey, that's not entirely accurate because there is a small thin red line around all of the letters. So that's really what my pencil mark was kind of the dimensions for. So I didn't quite go up to my pencil mark. But once it came time for the shading, I kind of just used a light gray, mixed it like normal, and tried to use both my reference image and all of the work I had done underneath these letters to kind of guide where these shades were going to go to make it look like the letters actually fit with the flow of the jersey as it was laid out and weren't just kind of weirdly stuck on top of it and ended up, I didn't want them to look flat on top of a really dynamic undershirt. This was a challenge in subtlety because I do think this painting, you can kind of see what parts I learned from and like what I then did better, like where I made my mistakes and where I improved. And I think the shading in some of these white parts of the numbers is definitely a testament to that. My hope is I can go and apply it to the other jersey as well and soften up a little bit of that shading because it is just so aggressive. But overall, I'm really happy with how these numbers came out. Lessons definitely learned. Doing the jersey entirely, including all of its shading first, before I put any of the numbers on top of it, was absolutely the way to do this. Why I did not do it in the first place, I don't know. There are so many ways that I've approached this painting that have not been smart. Please learn from my mistakes. Not that any of you are ever going to paint something like this, but if you do, work in layers. Do your background first. You'll save yourself so much headache later. Now, the outline around the letters is actually one of the few places I used the crimson in its true raw form because it went on top of the blue. It did not go on top of the white. I basically just bordered the white, and so I used only the crimson paint for his numbers. I do realize I just called them letters, but I used just the crimson to border his numbers, and I think it is absolutely perfect. I looked up a bunch of reference images from the 2008 Super Bowl, and it is a surprisingly bright red on their uniforms. The very last part of this jersey, though, for, the base colors is that gray shoulder detail that I kind of based out in gray, and I did, I think, try to include a little bit of green, but my green started not cooperating with me, so I didn't quite get as much of it as I wanted. But I tried to kind of draw out those lines and define where the dimensions of that crease in his armpit is. This again is so weird to me because the shoulder pads are impacting how the jersey moves with his arm. So I think in the end I got them right. I definitely didn't at first. The angle was all sorts of wrong. But with a little bit of patience and some trial and error, I got them a little bit more right, but they still just read weird to me because I'm struggling to imagine the padding that is sitting underneath the jersey. So I think it will all work out in the end. I think it looks fine. It's just still throwing me off. So here's where I'm going to leave it for this video. I know not all the details on the shirt are done. That's because that's a really specific shade of like a teal. So I gotta figure that out. I'm also really concerned about the curve of this Patriots logo on the helmet. This one's easy because it's basically the whole logo. That one's gonna be weird, so I'm leaving that one alone for now. That's supposed to say Patriots, but it's super scrunch, so I have to figure out how I want to deal with that. And I think that's his thumb that I haven't really counted for or done yet, so I gotta do that. I think I have to extend his shirt over just a little bit, and that section is just really weird. But this is what I have. I want to say it's half of the people done. I know very well it is not half of the entire board. There's literally still so much of this to go. This 8 isn't shaded at all. That just is the crimson. I need to do all the nice shading to make it look like it fits on him. I think the letters on the Patriot dude look really, really good. They're much easier just being white. This seemed to cover really well. I'm not super happy about how aggressive and crinkly his armpit looks, but it also looks like that in the image, so maybe it's fine. I don't think I'm gonna worry about it too much. I might clean it up a little bit, and by that I mean smudge it more to make the lines a little bit less aggressive. But overall, I'm really happy with how these guys look so far. The glare makes it really hard to see some of the detail, but yeah, we have the blue conquered and about half of my people. So that is all the work I have so far. And now we're going to get into a little bit of a rambly outro, so if you don't want to watch the rest of this, I totally understand. Thank you so much for sticking with me to this point. However, I'm going to ramble a little bit because I am stressed. I have a lot going on right now. I didn't get to do much on this project this past weekend. My parents were in town, and so obviously I spent time with them instead of painting or doing other things. I have a different commission piece that I'm doing for a friend's wedding that I need to get done in 2 weeks. I am also going to be doing my first ever little market with something associated with my work, so I'm actually super excited to be doing that, but that means I need to have stock. These are not my earrings, but they are new. Just side note, they're really cute and they make some fun noise. But I do make jewelry. I have a couple videos on it. I think I have a playlist if you want to check that out, but I am trying to get ready to have stuff, to have a table, to have a market, so getting all the equipment, and by that I mean just displays and stuff like that. And the other thing is I'm already stressing myself out about Halloween. I know what I'm going to be doing. I'm very much looking forward to it, and you bet there will be videos on the channel about it. So I have a lot going on. Oh, and I volunteered, oh my gosh, I have another mural project that I'm doing. That won't be starting until October. I have another small crochet commission that I'm doing for someone. So I have a lot of things coming just in my life, and I'm trying to make content out of it where I can. I may not be able to make content out of all of it, so please bear with me if these next couple uploads are a little all over the place. I swear I am doing my best to stay sane in the mix of things, because I have a very hard time saying no, especially when it is an artsy project and it sounds fun and it's cool and it's for people that I love, because making things for friends, doing a project for friends or with friends brings me so much joy. That's kind of how I see my YouTube channel, is you are now my compatriots coming along with me on the chaotic random process, hit my mic stand, that's over there, of everything that I'm doing. And so having you watch means the absolute world, and I'm very excited about what's happening and what's coming next. I have done so much because of this YouTube channel. I have pushed myself to achieve so many things. I mean, this guy is one of them. Without this channel, this worm, and this is not the hand for the worm, but this worm would not exist. So it is crazy, it is incredible, and I should probably stop saying yes to new projects, but knowing me, I won't. So that is the update. The update is that things are very exciting. I have a lot going on, but that means that sometimes getting to the projects that I'm actually trying to do with content has been a little bit challenging. So please stick with me, please bear with me. If you like this weird little corner of the internet, I'd love to have you stop by again. It truly means the world. And I think that's everything. Thank you so much for letting me ramble at the end of this video, assuming I decided to include it. And with all of that nonsense, I will see you in the next one.